Elon Musk is now the world's first trillionaire, and he got there by getting SpaceX to the biggest record-breaking IPO ever in history. SpaceX is now valued at $2.28 trillion, and all without having the physical ability to deliver on any of its current goals. Leading up to the IPO, Elon's been promising a bunch of wild things, as he does. Right now, he wants to put data centers in space. A lot of people sort of laughed that off and started in on the fact that he's just wrong about how things work again, because he thinks that this is going to cool the hardware more effectively, having them in space. But then we started to realize that he was serious. And then he also reiterated that he wants to make humans a multi-planetary species and take all of us to the moon and to Mars. Call me a cynic. And I absolutely am. But if someone pitches you on things that they can't possibly make good on, why on earth would you give them your money? Well, probably because the stock market isn't really at all about raising investment capital for businesses anymore, and much more about crony capitalism, where during the SpaceX IPO, at least 10 Trump officials held as much as $44 million in SpaceX stock before the company went public, which means that they all just made an absolute killing from a direct quid pro quo because SpaceX has received $10 billion in government contracts since 2025 alone. And one of those people is Donald Trump Jr., who holds SpaceX stock through a firm he owns called 1789 Capital. Overall, and inclusive of the SpaceX stock, since Trump got back into the White House, Jr.'s 1789 Capital firm shot up from $200 million in assets to $3.5 billion. It's all a grift. And Elon is just a great big part of that. He cannot stop talking about how he's going to put data centers in space so they can be cooled more effectively because, space is cold, bro. This guy, yeah. This was one of the major points of his pitch leading up to the IPO. And maybe you're wondering, what's so wrong about that? Because space really is cold. And that's fine because not everyone is really into science. I mean, Elon definitely isn't. Okay, so space has no air. Space is a vacuum. There's nothing inside of space, no medium that can transfer heat away from its source inside that vacuum. It does slowly radiate away, but not as quickly as it would need to for something like a data center to be cooled down. So space data centers would require space radiators to vent the heat produced by the bays of the GPUs. And I'm not an engineer, but I'm going to try to cover this in the best way that I can, and maybe someone can check me down in the comments. The data centers that he wants to launch into space are going into an overall product called the AI-1 satellite. The specs of the radiators alone are supposed to be 110 square meters, and those radiators are going to need to vent at a capacity of 1.4 kilowatts per square meter. And that's 4 times as much as the radiators on the International Space Station. And the ISS radiators cost $500 million. So at 4 times $500 million, SpaceX data center radiators alone would cost $2 billion for every unit. And we're talking about private sector money instead of government money, so it's going to be even more than that. And it's Elon, so there's an idiot tax, and so it's going to cost even more than that again. In 2025, SpaceX revenue was under $5 billion. In the last year of operation, the company has lost money. But there's such a bigger obstacle to all of this even before Elon can get to the point where he has to worry about venting heat from the data centers at all, because it's actually physically impossible for SpaceX to get them into orbit in the first place. And maybe you're about to fight me because you've seen a number of videos where Elon did cool things with rockets, like launch the Falcon 9 and then land the reusable liquid rocket boosters on a barge in the ocean. And that is cool. Elon has taken us to the point and a little beyond that point where the US government got us in 1958. Great. Awesome. The Falcon 9 does have over 600 successful launches. The problem is that the Falcon 9 can't launch the data centers. It doesn't have the payload capacity. And so Elon would have to use Starship, which has a payload capacity of 150 tons. And this is the amount of weight it can successfully and safely transport into low Earth orbit. Given the specs of the AI-1 satellites that Elon unveiled before the IPO, just the radiators and its solar panels necessary to power the things, those 2 components alone, getting them into space would require 190 Starship launches. And then you add in the actual components of the satellite hardware that would make the thing work, like the GPU racks, the batteries, and the structural housing, etc., and you have a product that's wider than a 747, and you have to launch 6,700 of these things before SpaceX can meet Elon's stated goal of producing 1 gigawatt of AI compute power per year. So Starship can reportedly fit 30 to 50 AI-1 satellite cores, so we're looking at an additional 130 to 220 launches. And the number of launches really matters here, because so far, the number of successful launches where Starship has reached low Earth orbit so far is 0. 0 launches. 0 times. Starship has never ever successfully made it into low Earth orbit. I don't know if it's even technically ever gotten to space, but it's never gotten far enough to complete an orbital insertion burn, which is kind of the first step into delivering a payload to orbit. But not only that, and even if we go with the most conservative estimate, so say 320 launches, SpaceX is legally approved by the FAA for just 25 launches a year. And then, after all that's done, if it's ever actually accomplished at all, and all of these A1 steak sauce satellites are in space, well then you have to maintain the things. And one thing I learned while reading the book Endurance, which is astronaut Scott Kelly's account of his year-long mission to the International Space Station, is that all of the astronauts, in addition to their regular duties, are always just constantly doing maintenance and fixing things on the space station. Vital things, like really important things, everything. They're keeping themselves aloft in space, just missing the Earth over and over again, duct taping stuff together and trying desperately to stay alive another day and fend off death in the completely inhospitable environment of space. Now, there are all kinds of things that can go wrong with these satellites. They'll need it to be at least somewhat shielded from radiation, because they'll need to be protected against the intense radiation of space, which electronics do not enjoy. Then there's going to be solar flares and micrometeorites and just general wear and tear. Have you ever seen a spacewalk? Like, watched one on live on the NASA YouTube channel, for example? Because I have. Not all the way through, because of reasons. And you go watch a spacewalk. Try to watch it the whole way through, if you can stand it. And when you come back tomorrow, you tell me whether you think it's at all practical to maintain an orbital fleet of 6,700 data centers. Because one thing about spacewalks is that it can take an entire day of preparation just to get out the door. So yeah, all of this is prohibitively expensive right now, and physically and legally impossible, and SpaceX does not have the technology. Not to mention, they also don't have the money. Maybe because my formal education is in the humanities, I just never understood the idea that company valuations are supposed to be based on actual existing material wealth and realistic potential near future wealth. Because as I can plainly see, and I think everyone else can too, they're very much not based on those things at all. And one research firm came out to say that before the SpaceX IPO, it was significantly overvalued. And they pointed out the same things that I'm pointing out, like the fact that they don't have the technology to do what Elon claims, and the fact that they would need an enormous injection of capital in order to do any of it, even if they did have the technology. And this firm, Morningstar, estimated that SpaceX is really worth just $780 billion, which is less than half of its initial IPO value. And then the IPO went live at a share price of $150, and then it got up to $167 by closing, which left SpaceX with a valuation of $2.18 trillion. And even the original valuation, which they went into the IPO with, was $1.77 trillion, and that amount of money is 100 times higher than the company's previous year's revenue. This is a company that continues to lose money and can't deliver on its promises because they're actually impossible, yet continues to grow in value. And one has to look around and wonder why exactly that is. Something a lot of people are talking about in terms of the blatant corruption is the part that's seeping into the lives of regular people. Because even if you're staying away from the SpaceX IPO and you're not investing in SpaceX and you're trying to just be as far from all this as you possibly can, it's possible that you're still going to feel this too. So there's a waiting period after companies go public before index funds are allowed to include these new companies in their mix of investments, but the Trump administration waived it this time for SpaceX. So the volatility that you see when a company debuts for the first time on the market could end up hitting regular people's retirement funds. And maybe it's ultimately just gonna go up, like overall the stock market always does. But some analysts are skeptical, especially because there's also a mandatory 180-day period where insiders aren't allowed to sell their shares after an IPO, and that helps to make the stock price stabilize and resist panicked crashes. But the company's S-1 filings show us that they're letting pre-IPO stockholders sell their shares in a series of graduated tiers, all before that 180-day period is up. So yeah, I mean, it's starting to look a little like an insider trading coming out party, where the wealthiest insiders are about to make a ton of money and pump and dump the stocks so you and the rest of the retail investors get to pay for it. And like every other cliche children's party, there's a magician. Because you'd have to believe in magic in order to buy the make-believe nonsense that Space Karen's cooked up this time. Yeah, but don't worry. I'm sure all the physical impossibility isn't going to stand in his way. Come on, guys. You think that someone who's famous for never delivering on his promises is suddenly just not gonna be able to deliver on his promises? What? Elon, if you're watching this, the only thing I want to see you launch into space in the near future is a prison. Don't worry about why. It'll be great. And when you stop being useful to the regime and ICE deports you to the space jail that you yourself built, you'll have plenty of time to read about what happens to unwanted, awkward oligarchs in authoritarian regimes. And maybe then you'll learn how to do some f***ing good in your life for once. And don't you forget to do some f***ing good in your own personal sphere of influence wherever you can. Because even in the face of all of this, we still need empathetic people with critical thinking skills who can counteract the pile of hot trash that Elon and his friends are piling onto the earth every second of every day. So you take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh yes, hello Mr. Musk. Welcome to Space Jail. Right this way. You'll notice that your cell has a truly wonderful view of a big radiator just out the porthole.